about a powerful family in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
And the source material we have, it reads like a political thriller.
It is a very captivating narrative.
Yeah.
And right at the center of it is a man named Tariq Siddiq.
Yeah.
He's the brother-in-law of the current prime minister, Sheikh Hasina.
So not just some random relative, but someone, at least according to this source, who is really a major player behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
Orchestrating events, wielding a lot of power.
Yes. The source uses very strong language, referring to him as a Trojan horse for Indian influence in Bangladesh. So quite a powerful metaphor.
Wow, okay. And it claims that he even received training from Indian intelligence. So, I mean, talk about adding a layer of complexity.
It really does. It makes you wonder what his true motivations might be. Is he acting in the best interests of Bangladesh? Or are there these, other agendas at play?
Yeah, good point. And then it gets even more intense because the source goes on to connect him to the 2009 BDR mutiny, which, for our listeners who might not remember, was this incredibly violent uprising within the Bangladesh Rifles, which is a paramilitary force. 57 army officers were killed.
Yeah, it was a real turning point in Bangladeshi politics.
Yeah.
And the source puts Tariq Siddiq right at the heart of it,
Yeah.
suggesting he was a key figure, maybe even orchestrated the whole thing to, eliminate rivals, consolidate his own power.
I mean, that's a shocking accusation. And it goes on to claim that he had this secret location called Aynaghor,
Right.
where torture allegedly took place, where he would carry out these political vendettas. I mean,
The description of Aynaghor is really quite chilling. It's portrayed as a place where any kind of dissent was silenced, and anyone who dared to oppose Tariq Siddiq would face, quite terrifying consequences.
so he had this image of a powerful figure operating in the shadows, potentially using violence and intimidation, to get what he wants. It really raises some serious concerns about the state of democracy in Bangladesh, at least during that time.
It certainly does. And it makes you wonder how much of his power stemmed from his connection to Sheikh Hasina, the prime minister. Was she even aware of his actions? And if so, to what extent was she, involved?
Yeah, it's interesting because the text, at least the way I read it, seems to suggest that there was a complicated dynamic between them.
Yes.
On the one hand, it portrays him as this powerful figure acting with a degree of autonomy, but on the other hand, it hints at a certain level of reliance on Sheikh Hasina's, authority. So it's really a relationship that deserves a lot more, deeper exploration.
Absolutely. And here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. While all this is going on in Bangladesh, there's another key player who's building a political career in the UK, Tulip Siddiq. Now, she's the niece of both Sheikh Hasina and Tariq Siddiq.
Right.
So you think, oh, she's a world away from all this drama that's going on. But the source very much connects her to the story. It does. It alleges that Tulip Siddiq's rise in British politics was fueled by wealth that was obtained through corrupt practices in Bangladesh.
Wow.
So a pretty bold claim. It implies that the family's influence extends far beyond, national borders.
Yeah, that's a really serious accusation. I mean, whether he's saying she was actively involved in the family's, alleged schemes or just benefiting from the wealth that was generated.
It's a little ambiguous on that point, to be honest.
Also,
It does imply a connection, though. It suggests that British journalists started uncovering evidence that linked her wealth to the alleged abuses in Bangladesh.
That is a tangled web indeed.
It is.
So we have this family potentially entangled in this complex, web of power, corruption, maybe even violence.
Right.
And it seems their influence might actually reach far beyond the borders of Bangladesh.
A story that really raises a lot of questions about the nature of power, the reach of corruption, and the challenges of accountability.
All right, before we go too deep into all the implications of all this, let's take a step back and think about this. What does this family's story tell us about the bigger picture of, politics and power, not just in Bangladesh, but on a global scale?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something that I think we'll continue to explore as we delve further into this captivating and complex narrative.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about these allegations and how they connect events in Bangladesh with, developments in British politics. It really raises questions about how transnational power and influence can be.
Exactly. The source seems to argue that corruption and the effects of corruption aren't limited by national borders. This family's alleged actions, if true, demonstrate how power and wealth can be used to gain influence in different parts of the world.
And thinking about your background in international relations, this case must be particularly intriguing for you, right? It really highlights how interconnected these political systems are and how actions in one country can have these ripple effects that are felt in other places.
It absolutely does. And it's a reminder that we can't view political events in isolation. There are often these complex networks of relationships and interests at play.
Now, the source doesn't just stop at implicating Tulip Siddiq in the family's, financial dealings. It actually goes a step further and connects her wealth to the accusations surrounding Aynaghor.
Yes, the text seems to imply a link, suggesting that her success in the UK was, at least in part, built on the foundation of the family's alleged wrongdoings back in Bangladesh.
But hold on a second. How plausible is it that someone operating in British politics could be connected to these alleged atrocities in Bangladesh? I mean, wouldn't there be more scrutiny, more safeguards in place to prevent something like that?
That's a valid question, and it's important to remember that the source is presenting one specific perspective.
Right.
It's possible that there are other factors at play, other explanations for Tulip Siddiq's success that aren't really being considered here.
Of course. I mean, it's crucial to maintain a critical perspective, right?
Yeah.
And not jump to conclusions just based on a single source.
Right.
But even if we, take the source's claims with a grain of salt, it still raises some uncomfortable questions about the potential for corruption to transcend borders.
It certainly does. And it makes you wonder what the implications are for international accountability. I mean, if a powerful family can allegedly leverage wealth and influence gained through, corrupt practices in one country to gain a foothold in another, how do we even begin to address that?
It seems like a daunting challenge.
Yeah.
And it really makes you appreciate the importance of those organizations and institutions that are working to combat corruption and promote transparency on a global scale.
Absolutely. This case, as presented by the source, really underscores the need for greater international cooperation, stricter regulations to prevent the misuse of power and wealth across borders.
Now, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about Tariq and Tulip Siddiq, but there's still one key figure in this story that we haven't fully explored. Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. How does she fit into all of this?
The source definitely implicates Sheikh Hasina in the narrative. It suggests that she was aware of and perhaps even complicit in the actions of her brother-in-law, Tariq Siddiq.
So they're portraying her as a sort of puppet master, allowing Siddiq to operate behind the scenes and exert his influence. But isn't she known for being a strong and decisive leader in her own right? It seems strange that she would be so easily manipulated.
That's where the source's narrative gets a bit more nuanced. It doesn't necessarily portray her as a passive figure. Instead, it hints at a more complex relationship, suggesting that she may have been dependent on Siddiq's ruthlessness to maintain her own grip on power.
Okay, so maybe it's not as simple as her being in control or being controlled. Perhaps it was a mutually beneficial arrangement where they each use the other to achieve their own goals.
That's a very plausible interpretation. The source really paints a picture of Bangladeshi politics as this complex and often ruthless game where alliances are fluid and personal ambition often trumps, any ethical considerations.
It's a stark reminder that even in democratic systems, power can be concentrated and misused. And it raises questions about the effectiveness of checks and balances, right? When those in power are willing to collude for personal gain.
It is a sobering thought, and it makes you wonder, how do we ensure that democratic institutions are strong enough to resist these kinds of abuses of power?
I mean, that's a question that political scientists and reformers grapple with all over the world. It's about finding ways to promote transparency, accountability, ethical conduct within political systems.
Precisely, and it requires a commitment from both those in power and the citizenry to uphold democratic values and hold each other accountable.
All right, we've explored the accusations against Tariq Siddiq. We delved into the intriguing case of Tulip Siddiq in the UK, and even touched on the complexities of Sheikh Hasina's alleged involvement. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I keep coming back to this question: What are the broader lessons we can draw from this story? What does it tell us about the nature of power, corruption, and the challenges facing democracies, around the world?
That's a great question to reflect on, and it's something that I think we'll continue to discuss as we move into the final part of our exploration.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We've uncovered some really shocking allegations about this powerful family in Bangladesh, their alleged corruption, their potential reach into international politics. It really gets you thinking about the systems that'll allow these kinds of dynamics to flourish.
It certainly does. This case, as it's presented in the source material, really highlights the complexities of power, the allure of wealth, and just the potential for abuse, especially when there's a lack of effective oversight and accountability.
Yeah, and the source paints a pretty dark picture, suggesting that personal ambition and the pursuit of power can often override any kind of ethical considerations.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder that corruption isn't just a problem in developing countries. It can happen anywhere, even in established democracies like the UK.
That's a crucial point. This case study really challenges the notion that certain countries are somehow immune to these kinds of issues. It reminds us that corruption is a global phenomenon that requires constant vigilance and proactive measures to combat it.
And knowing your interest in the history of political scandals, I think you'll find this particular case, quite fascinating. It has all the elements of a classic political thriller, right?
Yeah.
Power struggles, hidden agendas, international intrigue.
It certainly does, and it reminds us that history is full of examples of individuals and families who have amassed great power and wealth, sometimes through questionable means. The question is, what lessons can we learn from these cases? How can we prevent history from repeating itself?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. What safeguards can we put in place to prevent the abuse of power and promote greater transparency and accountability?
Well, there's no easy answer, but I think it starts with fostering a culture of ethics and integrity, both in government and in society as a whole. It also requires strong institutions that are capable of investigating and prosecuting corruption, regardless of who is involved.
And informed and engaged citizenry is essential as well. People need to be aware of these issues and willing to hold their leaders accountable.
Absolutely. A free and independent press is also crucial in exposing corruption and shining a light on wrongdoing.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that power, wealth, and influence can be incredibly seductive forces. And unless we have robust systems in place to check those forces, they can be easily misused and abused.
That's a powerful insight. This case study really serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that vigilance and a commitment to ethical conduct are essential for any society, regardless of its political system or level of development.
Yeah, and it's also a reminder that even seemingly disparate events, happening in different parts of the world can be interconnected. This family story, as presented in the source, highlights how actions in one country can have repercussions on a global scale.
It's a testament to the interconnectedness of our world and the need for greater international cooperation to address issues like corruption, which often transcend national boundaries.
Well, this has been a fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too. It's given us a glimpse into the complex world of Bangladeshi politics and the intricate web of power and influence that operates not just there, but in many parts of the world.
It's a story that raises more questions than it answers, and that's a good thing. It challenges us to think critically about the systems that govern our societies and the individuals who operate within those systems.
And it underscores the importance of staying informed, engaged, and vigilant in the face of potential abuses of power. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. It's a starting point for further exploration and critical thinking about these important issues.
Exactly. Keep researching, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a more just and equitable world.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of the deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep thinking critically.